We are honored today to have Senator Les Seiler with us. Senator Seiler is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He has represented the 33rd District since 2012. He currently practices law in Hastings, and in a previous life, among other positions, he served as the Nebraska Assistant Attorney General. Senator Seiler.
I am a veteran, and I was alive when Pearl Harbor was bombed. I was 9 months old. I would like to visit with you today, and I'll refer to some numbers, and I hope you can follow through with them. Can you hear me okay? Tying me behind that podium's like tying a rope around my neck. But my committee, the Judiciary Committee, handles all of the legislation that comes through regarding prisons, prison reforms. If you don't remember anything after I leave here, remember that everything that we're talking about today is triggered by overcrowding of prisons. That's how it got started. That's how we're still working on it. And probably the next 10 years will be spent working on the overcrowded. I want to take you back 15, 20 years ago when they built the prison at Tecumseh. There was a big argument where it should be. McCook, Hastings, or Tecumseh. They chose Tecumseh, which is a very small community, because it was a small community and they thought it would grow. If you build it, they will come. You've probably heard of that before. They didn't come. And we have two problems at Tecumseh. We have a problem of overcrowding, not much, just about 8% is all. But we also have a problem of understaffing. And those two are deadly problems. How many people here know how many prisons Nebraska Corrections Department runs? Anybody know? There's 10. People think of Lincoln and they think of Tecumseh. And maybe once in a while people from western Nebraska think of McCook. But that's 3 out of the 10 that we actually run. They are all overcrowded. Tecumseh is the closest, it's at 108%. Overall, we've got 5,218 people behind prison bars in those, separated out among those 10 prisons. The average percentage that you want to watch, because you'll see it in the newspaper, is 160%. The cases out of California and out of Texas, the federal government filed against the State Department of Corrections in those two states, and they were at 120%. And they said over 120%. They said anything over 120% is not possible. It's got to be changed. And the bad thing about it, the judge in California said, you're at 140 something. I'm going to make you reduce down to 120. And he just opened the doors. How many of you are from western Nebraska or Wyoming or any of those cattle states? You know what a gate cut is? You know what a gate cut is. That's what he did. He just opened the door and said the first number that gets down to 120 goes out the door. Didn't care whether they were murderers, rapists, didn't matter. They went out. Within 6 months, most of them were already back with recidivism. So we can't tolerate that. I met with the director and chief attorney from Washington of the ACLU about 6 months ago, and they were getting ready to file. And after our discussion, they decided to give us some more time under LB 605, which is what we're here really to talk about. Basically, that is to look as a long-term plan to the year 2020 to lower our prison overcrowding in all of our prisons, all 10 of them, to get those down below 120%. How are we going to do this? Well, let's go back and see what caused some of these problems. I want to take just a few minutes to blame people. The blame is that when they built the prison at Tecumseh, it dropped the overcrowdedness. Wonderful. The problem is they just kept on. It was in the 80s, and it was an era of be tough on crime. Give everybody the maximum. And they didn't pay attention to what they were doing. Along came a couple bad downturns in the economy like we're going into right now, and they cut off the money for the prisons and put it over into the school systems. With that decrease in funds, they had to cut down on programming. They threw out mental health wasn't an issue anymore. And they cut back on their staff to bare bones minimum. And that proceeded to get worse until 2014. In 2014, we realized we had an overcrowding problem. Congressman Brad Ashford was the chair of the Judiciary. I was his deputy. And we decided that it needed to be investigated. Nico Jenkins. How many here know about the Nico Jenkins case? A lot of you do. It started out with an investigation of how Nico Jenkins got out of prison and out to the streets. And that was LR 424. And basically, Nico served every day that the judge said he had to. That's called jamming out. Jamming out. So there was no way to hold him unless somebody filed a mental health proceedings. The county attorney in Johnson County, where Tecumseh is, asked for a mental health report on Nico before he got out. And he was denied that report by the Department of Corrections. He got out, murdered 4 people, and he's undergoing sentencing right now for the death penalty. He taught a lot of prisoners what to do. If you go out on parole, you've got somebody looking over your shoulder. But if you serve every day of your sentence, less good time, then you're jammed out. And nobody's got control over you. And believe it or not, a lot of prisoners would rather sit in the prison for their full term than be supervised on release. So we decided to try and correct that problem. And we now have it set up that you cannot get out without serving some type of supervised release. Either through the parole or through supervised release at the district judge's level. Why would we want to do that? 2, we could get them out earlier to solve our overcrowding problem. And 2, if you look at the federal system, which we have a federal prison in Hastings, that every person there in that federal prison works during the day at a manufacturing or a hospital or some local job. You say, well, why would the local employers want such a person? I mean, he's convicted. He's serving federal time. Why would they want him? Well, when you got 2% unemployment, you don't have a lot to choose from. And what really happens for these prisoners in the federal system is they show up sober. They're not hungover. They have no drug problems because they go back to prison every night. And they're enjoying getting out of sitting there in a cell. And they learn a trade. And from that experience, we looked at doing that in Nebraska. And we do it by supervised release at the time the district judge makes his decision, or through parole. I got to stop right here and talk about parole. If you think state government is wonderful, check this out. We have a parole board that determines who gets out and what criteria. But the administration was over here under corrections. And the administration of parole never talked to the parole board. They just did all the numbers, gave them the information, and forgot about it. So 605 moved the parole board, moved the parole administration from corrections over to the parole board. And what a difference that's making. It's amazing how many people are qualified for parole that were not getting it. The other amazing part you'll hear people talk about is programming, and it goes hand in hand with parole. You have to take so many programs, anger management, criminal classes. You have to take self-sufficiency, like what kind of a job you're going to get, some education on jobs, working on a release so that you get some education on the job training. Those type of things you have to have before you qualify for parole. When I first got into the on the judiciary in 2014, I was getting letter after letter from inmates at the prisons saying, I've been here 2 years longer than my sentence, but I can't get out because I haven't taken these courses. Well, there were games being played. If certain people didn't want certain people to get out, meaning the administration, they would simply, when the program that you need, say anger management, came up for you to take at Tecumseh, they'd move you to Lincoln. Program's not available. So then you're about ready to get the program in Lincoln, they'd move you back to Tecumseh. 2 years go by and you've served 2 years more than your sentence. Possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's also true. They were doing that kind of stuff. And that's what we discovered on LR 424. There were all kinds of games being played by the management. And most of it was revenge-type programs. When we got done with 424 hearing, we recommended 5 people be fired. They actually fired 7. I think we just touched the surface. So that's the background of where LB Legislative Bill 605 comes into play. And 605 is an overcrowding bill, period. But what we attacked is a number of things. One, the overcrowding. Is it working? Well, LR 605 was drafted by the Council of State Governments, which is a nonprofit corporation nationwide. Their headquarters are in Washington, D.C., but the program we followed was the program out of the state of Washington. And that's because that's where Scott Frakes, the director of corrections, is from and did his major experience. 605 says that unless for all minor offenses being Class 3 felonies, Class 3A felonies, and Class 4 felonies, you have to have supervised release. We want you out there working. You got to remember, the average age of prisoners in the state penitentiary is 37 years old. It's not all kids. The average age is 37. These people have families. Who's supporting those families when they're in prison? 90% of them are supported by you taxpayers. So if we can get them back into the community, holding a full-time job and supporting their own family and supporting them, because you got to remember it's $39,000 a year to keep a person in prison. We don't want them there. We want them back being useful citizens. And there's no reason we can't do that. The 2012 recidivism rate. Does everybody know what recidivism is? You go out and you commit a crime and you come back. It was about 33% overall. We believe since 605 has been passed and these people are getting training and programs under supervised release, that number is dropping considerably. And we're seeing just since 2014 to today, well, till June of 2016, we've dropped 1% in population. And in criminal aspects of a prison, that's a big drop, a big drop. And so we believe, following the South Carolina and Georgia example, which copied the Washington example, that we can drop that down below 120% by the year 2020 without building any more prisons. Well, you say, what's wrong with building more prisons? $500 million worth. That's what it costs to build a new prison today. $500 million. Because of all the rules and regulations, all the requirements that you have to have in a new prison, you're looking at that kind of a number. And that's to take care of about 200 people. And that's not counting costs of actually running it. So we're understaffed now in our prison system. If we build another 200, a prison for 200, where are we going to get people to staff that? Why are we understaffed? Did a little investigation on that. How many here would like to go to work for the prison system under this circumstance? Your starting pay is $15 an hour. 20 years from now, your pay is $15 an hour. That's even worse than a school teacher. At least they get stepped raises. Can you believe anybody would sign a contract like that? I couldn't. I have represented both unions, public unions and public employers, and neither side would ever sign a contract like that. But that's what's been going on in the state pen programs. You start out with $15 an hour, and you're still making $15 an hour. Well, the governor raised that the other day to, I think, $16.50 an hour. But there's still no steps. So people get trained in our system and immediately go to Douglas County Jail, to the Lancaster County Jail, Hall County. All have higher starting wages, and then they have steps the longer you're there. And the other thing that makes no sense in our system is that we train almost all of our new employees at Tecumseh. You know what we have at Tecumseh? The toughest people in the prison system. These are no angels down at Tecumseh. Almost all of our first-degree murder cases are down there. All of our heavy assault cases are down there. These are bad people. And we have our rookiest, youngest people in employment working down there. And they don't stay long. So we're trying now to clean that up. Again, everything goes back to overcrowding. During that times when let's get tough on criminals, we dropped the programming. Nebraska used to be almost, their prisons were self-sufficient. Out here on South 13th Street, they had one of the best dairy herds in the United States. They provided milk for the entire prison system. They had one of the biggest truck farms raising vegetables and all kinds of food products, fruit. They had a great orchard out there for the whole system. Hastings, they had for the mental health, they also had a support system that fed the criminal system. And then came along a ruling in another state that we followed was, oh, well, that's hard labor, so you can't force them to do that kind of work. And the cost of imprisonment went up. I'll bet every one of you worked when you were in high school. I'll bet every one of you have worked since you've been in college. I know I sure did. So I didn't think it was hard labor. I thought it was an act of necessity. If you don't work, you don't eat. I know that's outlandish thinking in today's world, but there is no reason we couldn't get part of that back in programming. We still have the best furniture makers in the United States. Cornhusker Industries, if you ever see that sign, look on some of your chairs and desks in conference rooms and professors' desks and things like that. You find most of them came from Cornhusker Industries. Beautiful furniture. The state capitol's furniture has almost all come from there. These people are experts at making furniture. And they can sell it to nonprofit organizations. It's a great craft to learn and then get out of prison. But it's so small. It's so small. We need to expand that programming. Last, I'd like to visit with you a little bit about mental health. 605 touches on it, but mental health will be the coming issue in this year's legislation. LR 34 and LR 413 were studied this summer. And we had a number that was thrown at us 3 years ago that said of all the prisoners that are given mental health exams and followed by psychiatrists and psychologists, 33% of them are seriously mentally ill. 33%. Well, seriously mentally ill. What about those not seriously? It runs up to about 80%. Have some degree of mental illness, alcohol abuse, or drug abuse. And what has Nebraska been doing for those people? Giving them a handful of pills as they go out the door and say, good luck. And they go right back to their hometown, same county attorney, same judge, and in about 6 months or less, they're arrested for doing something totally outlandish, like beating up their wives or their significant others. They take them down. We've got a law in the state of Nebraska that you ought to be aware of. You cannot put a mentally ill person in a jail. So I'm the police officer. I have this person by the shoulder, and I know he's mentally ill. No question about it. I've arrested him 2 or 3 times. There's no place at the inn. I can't put him in that jail cell right over there. So I keep him in the car and I call the county attorney. Quoting from Elizabeth Lay, the deputy county attorney in Columbus. Even before I get dressed, if I get a call at night to go to the courthouse, I call Hastings Mary Landing Hospital to see if they have an opening. Mary Landing Hospital in Hastings has 6 full-time psychiatrists and about 5 psychologists and a lot of nurses' aides. They have one whole floor of the 7th floor of Mary Lanning Hospital is devoted to mental health. And a lot of that is for emergency protective care, and people always call it EPC. Emergency protective care. So if they say, yes, we've got a room, she says to the sergeant, take him to Hastings, check him in there. The paperwork, I'll have it done in the morning and email it to him. If they say, no, I don't have room, she's got a choice at Grand Island of one bed. She's got another choice of about 5 beds over at Kearney. And she's out of beds. 90% of the time they're full. So now what's her job? Her job is to file a criminal complaint for assault on this guy. And he gets up before the court, and everybody in the room knows he's got a mental illness, but he's in criminal court. The judge looks at the record. Wow, this is his 5th go-around. What are we going to do with this guy? He just got back from serving a year in the state pen. Well, we'll teach him a lesson. We'll send him back for 5 years. And that circle gets tighter every time he gets picked up. And what does he get for treatment at the Hastings or at Lincoln Hospital or prison? Nothing. He might get put on some pills, and then at the last day they hand him a handful of pills and send him on his way. He goes back to Columbus, and in 6 months he'll be back. Because there's one thing you know for sure about mentally ill people. If they are correctable by medication, if they are correctable, the minute they get symptom-free, they throw the pills away because they're cured. And they're never cured. Then starts the rotation again in the circle. And the circle gets tighter and tighter. And if we could clear out 1/3 of the people that have mental illness, serious mental illness, and getting them good programming in a regional center or some type of psychiatric help, we wouldn't have an overcrowding problem. We would. So it's been proposed that we build an emergency protective care. Now, emergency protective care only is good for 7 days. So what do we do after 7 days? This guy comes in, he's raging, and in the end of 7 days, they've given him enough medicine that he got him under control. Under the current law, he has to go back out on the street. And that's a revolving door. What I proposed in LB 999 4 years ago is to build a wing for emergency protective care for the whole state. You're talking about 40 to 50 beds needed. Would cover the whole state, because that's only going to last 7 days. Then create another wing for the long-term, medium term is a better term. And get them under control, get them some programming, getting them know what they're doing, and then ship them to regional residents in the community residence. And then they go back and get them a job, get them settled down, then basically go back home. And by training them that way, we won't have this vicious circle in prison. We won't have the vicious circle in the emergency protective care. They'll be stabilized. They will be like supervised release for our prisoners. There'll be somebody looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're taking their medication, making sure that they're showing up at work. And I believe with my whole heart that those proposed issues would have passed and would have been put in place had not this downturn happened. Now we're $1 billion short on funding in the legislature. So this is going to come to a screeching halt. And we're going to be back right where we were in 2009. How many of you out here are agricultural majors? None? It's too bad. If I was going to ask you, the challenge to the agricultural majors is how do we get corn back up to $8 a bushel? Then everybody's got money. The state's got money, the farmers got money, people in town have money. But at $2.97, nobody has any money. And we still have the problems. So that's where we're at and where we're going. And we're going to, the legislature will tackle that problem. Sorry to say I won't be part of it. I voted wrong on the death penalty, and according to the people in my district, and I got voted out. Would I do it over again? Absolutely. Well, at least I'd have 4 votes. Well, anyway, I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think you were going to ask me a question about the death penalty. Now's the time.
Open the floor first to others.
Oh, okay.
Because we do want to approach the death penalty, a hot issue in the state of Nebraska, but questions you might have regarding prisons or other issues.
Come on, the toughest question's always the first one. Just like I'm glad to see you are all Presbyterians, the front row's empty. Yes, ma'am.
Are there legal remedies for inmates who are kept beyond their time? So you said they can be there for 2 extra years because they're not getting their programming and things like that. Do they have legal remedies once they get out for that, or that's just?
No, they have legal remedies while they're in. It's called a post-conviction law. But get through the system.
They can't sue anybody?
Well, they would sue to get out under post-conviction relief, but the problem is that the system is so jammed up that that it'll be 2 years before they get out. And nobody, by the way, has filed under that. Good question.
I just want to ask you to address or provide your thoughts on the federal system. BOP recently came out with a decision to develop its own education school system, if you will, at the federal level. Could you talk about some of the specific steps you think, in an ideal world, Nebraska should be taking with regard to education, vocational programming, and so forth? You've emphasized the need for programming, but what role does education of the incarcerated population play in your mind?
Okay. Well, there's no question that the education plays a tremendous part. If you will just, easy assignment, when you're reading the World Herald or the Lincoln Star under a recently committed crime, almost every time they'll say drop out in the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. The World Herald's good at that. You can see how many of these people that are committing vicious crimes, murder, assaults with intent to kill, have dropped out at an early age. So education becomes clear. What boggles my mind is we don't learn our lessons. In the 60s, when I was in law school here and practicing in the Attorney General's office, if you were in a state penitentiary, you could actually get a degree from the University of Nebraska. They made arrangements. So you could take classes here at the university, end up with a degree. There were a lot of teachers turned out in the 60s and 70s. And we hit the 80s and everybody had to get tough. That program disappeared. Yeah, you don't want to teach anybody how to be a professional. You'd leave them in the state penitentiary and let them become professional crooks. Now, it doesn't make sense when you think about it. I'll bet I could give you an assignment to do a program that would be beneficial to those prisoners, and you'd come up with great programs. Great ways for them to support themselves and their families. You would. But if you get into the practice of how it's run, how the pens run, you just shake your head. They do everything backwards and have since the 80s. I believe this director, Scott Frakes, is the best thing to come along in a long time. If they'll let him do what he wants to do, we'll get our way out of this problem. But, somebody said, well, he hasn't done anything since he's been here. Well, 2 weeks after he was here, he had a full-blown riot in Tecumseh. He's had inmates escape. You just go down the list of horribles, and it's all been on his watch, but it didn't occur on his watch. The factors all took place on the prior watch. And I'm not just patting Scott on the back because I think he's earns his keep. I pat him on the back because he knows what the heck he's doing. And compared to the other two directors that I worked with, he really does. But he's got to get those prisons under control. Again, overcrowding, staff short, all those items play into what's going on in those prisons. I got to be acting governor 2 Saturdays ago. Everybody else was out of town. The lieutenant governor was gone. The secretary of state was gone. The chairman of the exec committee was gone. So I left the chairman of the judiciary as the acting governor. My fear was that somebody would break out of the penitentiary. Other than that, I knew I wasn't going to be doing anything, but I was fearful of that. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So you had talked about like how the state pen has like low rates of pay for all of its employees. Is there a feasible option for the state of Nebraska to actually answer that, or is it economically unfeasible?
Yes, there is. We're under the CIR commission, so that they have to have a comparable array. And the comparable array at starting pay is probably within the $15. It's where they go from there that's the problem. And the comparable arrays, the jail at Grand Island, the jail at Lincoln, the jail in Omaha, all have stepping stones. The state patrol have stepping stones. So it's not, all we have to do is follow our own examples and we can get around those problems. Then it's an encouragement for you to stay because you know your salary is going to go up. If I usually speak more to the ladies on this. If I came home from prison or working at the prison as a correction officer, and say you and I are married, and I said, hey, you said, hey, what'd you do today? I said, we got in the damnedest brawl you ever saw. And 9 of my correction officers went to a hospital. What are you going to tell me? You got 2 little kids. You're going to look for a new job, aren't I? Whether I like my job or not, she's going to tell me, you go find another job. I'm not raising these 2 kids by myself. And that's a fact. We had, in a period of time, we had 11 correction officers be hospitalized. And that was about a 2-week period of time. One social worker got her face cut clear across by 2 people who took her down and slashed her face. So we got to compensate them, and I think we can. And we got to give them safety. And the way safety is provided is by numbers. Instead of the boss telling me I'm taking this prisoner across over to the medical center by myself, versus if you're fully staffed, 2 people take him over there. You're safer. You don't have that problem. This guy's not going to act out if he's got a prison guard on each side of him. But if he's got one, and let's say he's a great big dude, and the guard happens to be a small guy, he may try to take him on. And they have been. But the record is absolutely clear that when you have the sufficient accompanying people, there's no problem. So we've got to get back to full staff. Up there, sir.
There we are. Senator, you mentioned earlier that Director Frakes has some good ideas and some plans if they would let him do it. Those were your words. How do we, as residents of the state of Nebraska, influence this process and encourage him to let it?
Okay?
And then the follow-up question, how effective is our voice at following whatever plan you tell us? How often do you listen to the residents as a Judiciary Committee?
Well, I didn't once, and I probably got kicked out of office for that. No, there's two ways to do that. When we have our hearings, when the Judiciary Committee has a hearing on prisons, it's published. And the public is invited to come. And normally, you'll see a note that says, invited speakers only. Well, I was chairman for 2 years and member for 4 years. And I will tell you that every hearing we had, and we had a hearing on every bill that was sent to us. And in the 90-day bill, we got 168 bills, and in a short period, we got 123 bills. We had hearings on every one of those bills. And at the end of the hearing, after the invited speakers had spoke, we always opened it up to the public. So that's your opportunity. Or you can send a letter to the chairman of the Judiciary and tell him what you think about the issues, and they'll make it part of the record. And I will tell you that members of the Judiciary Committee read those letters and understand them. The other alternative you have is if you have a serious problem and you're aware of facts maybe not known to the general public, but you happen to have a special relationship and you can talk to, you've got this information. You can go to the ombudsman. And the ombudsman has 2 deputies that really work with the prisons every day. And they're really good. They really know what they're doing. So there's a number of ways you can get input. You bet. Now, do I listen to the public? Well, I did. On almost every issue except the death penalty. And I listened to the committee hearing, and I guess I spent too many years in front of the courtroom that I judged it based on the evidence that was presented, and that didn't agree with the people in my district, and I got voted out. So I'm now training dogs. Hunting dogs. Okay?
Let's turn our attention to the death penalty for a moment, a hot issue in the state of Nebraska. The citizens voted to return to that practice. What do you see looking in the future, the state of Nebraska or the country? Your thoughts
Let
on this
me
topic?
take you through how I decided to vote in favor of repealing the death penalty. We had 28 witnesses come before us on the issue of the bill to repeal the death penalty. All 28 of those people testified, do away with it. We had one person show up to testify against against repealing the death penalty. And that was Don Klein, county attorney at Omaha, Douglas County. Don Klein, in my opinion, is the sharpest lawyer in the state on the death penalty. And here's what he said. Well, it sure as heck isn't a deterrent. I've got 50 murders in my district that we've filed on. It's not deterring anything. And that's in a 40 square block area. 50 murders. Age, 19 to 20 years old. Victims, 19 to 20 years old. Costs? Man, he said, I've got a ton of assistant attorneys, county attorneys working for me that do nothing but death penalty. It's costing our county huge sums of money. And then we got to pay for the defense counsel. I can tell you the 5 murder cases in Norfolk, Nebraska, in the bank that killed those people, the county had to pay $5 million just for the trial of those 5. That didn't count the appeals to the Supreme Court, appeals into federal court. That $5 million. And if you get it wrong, your county can pay $28 million, like Gage County is right now, to the people that were placed in prison for, 6 years, 7 years? More, maybe it was more than that. But anyway, they got $28 million to divide 6 ways. I had a friend of mine say he'd sit in prison for $28 million. I said, no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't last a week in there. Everybody thinks to murder people that are, I called it incarceration, death by incarceration. Because the last 6 people to die died of old age and disease, not from being electrocuted or given a drug. Williams was the last one, Walking Willie, was the last one to be executed. My memory's correct. I knew Walking Willie. He was a cooler on a racetrack when I loaded horses in the starting gates. He wasn't much use to anybody. So nobody's going to miss Walking Willie. But that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is it any criminal law, is it a deterrent? And the best attorney in the state stands up and says, it's not a deterrent. It's expensive. And it drags out over long periods of time. I was asked earlier before this started, what do I think the United States Supreme Court's going to do with this death penalty? I think it's pretty easy to map out. Every case that's come before it so far in the last 10 years has taken a little nick out of it, saying, well, we're not going to throw out the death penalty completely, but it was a teenager. And everybody knows the teenage brain hasn't fully developed yet. I take that as a direct insult to my family. My dad was in the 8th grade when he dropped out of school and went to work full time. Made a good living. Worked hard, but he made a good living. So his brain wasn't developed, I'm sure. I don't believe that. I think that's malarkey. But that's the trick they use to get rid of the death penalty for teenagers. Now, I'm not saying that's bad or indifferent, but it just shows you how the Supreme Court didn't want to take the whole issue on. Nebraska Supreme Court, they said that the electric chair was cruel and unusual. Just a chick out of it. They didn't take it on full blast and say all death penalties are cruel and unusual. But I can tell you, I don't know if Chief Justice made any comments on the death penalty or not, but I know I got a lot of congratulations on my vote, which overturned the death penalty, and then my vote to overturn the governor's veto from judges. So again, their thoughts are, hey, we got to follow the law, but if it's unconstitutional, we can do it. But they won't take it all on. Sooner or later, the United States Supreme Court is going to take it on. And I believe they will find it unconstitutional. of any kind, whether it's by drug, by electric chair, by Utah's firing squad, all that. I believe they'll find it, I think it will come up under a federal case, not under a state case. I think that's where they'll hit it first. So you guys got some interesting, how many of you planning on going to law school? Hey, good. Good, glad to see that. Plan on staying, working hard. But you'll have a lot of fun. I wouldn't trade my 50 years of the practice of law for anything. Any other questions on the death penalty?
We got time for some death penalty questions here. Come on, this is a hot one.
Sir?
What's in the news right now about trying to bring down a veil of secrecy or whatever you want to call it on what drugs are used and how? Apparently they do this in Missouri. How would you vote on that if you could, and how do you think that's going to turn out?
Well, I think what's so funny, and it's not funny, it's ironical, not funny, that the people that are hollering about transparency that the governor and his henchmen ran a campaign against me spent about $72,000 on transparency. Seiler voted for secrecy when he voted for the election of the speaker and the election of the chairman of the committees. Everything else is wide open. You can sit in your living room and watch it on TV. Every vote is open, except those. Those are the same people that are saying, oh, we got to protect these people that are making the drugs, or protect these people that are administering the drugs. I mean, have it one way or have it the other, but you can't stand on both of them. It's so foolish. It makes no sense, you know? So my position is one or the other. And I believe that I would probably vote to retain the secrecy on both sides, except for part of it, and I'd move to strike part of it. I'd move that the secrecy of the people administering it, administering the drug, or the electricity, or the gas chamber, whatever they have for a protocol, should be kept secret. I think the election of the speaker and the election of the chairman of the standing committees should be secret. So there's no retaliation either way. But they went too far. They've gone too far. You should know what drug they're using. You should know what the consequences of that drug is. How do you know if they don't lay there in absolute pain for 2 or 3 hours because you used the wrong drug? When they say that barbiturate will knock down a horse and kill it, and that's what the veterinarians use. I saw a horse by the name of Little Blue lay on its side and suffer for 4 hours. Finally, the owner went over and got a pistol, walked over and shot it. He couldn't take it anymore. Saw that in my own eyes. Probably one of the best racehorses ever to be on the Nebraska circuit. Broke its leg, had to be put down. They kept using the same drug that they're proposing for putting down human on that horse, and it didn't work. Did not work. So, I have some problems with that. Any other questions, sir? Okay.
Going once, going twice.
In Louisiana, they just came up with a new law that says targeting a police officer is now can be, if you specifically target a police officer, it can be used for the death penalty. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? Do you think that will become more common? I saw states like New Mexico, New Jersey, and California are trying to get the same laws. Do you think that will happen?
Yeah, the question, if you heard it, was, as I understood it, was that there's a law saying that if you target a police officer, you get the death penalty. This is a reaction to the number of police officers that have been shot at and targeted, ambushed. I again would rather have death by incarceration. I would rather, and I'm a little cruel that way. If you think it's fun sitting in a 10 by 8 cell with no TV, no radio, no books, no papers, 23 hours a day without talking to anybody, try it. Go back to your dorm room and sit there for a weekend. See what you think. It's more cruel than killing them with an injection and a needle in the arm. So I take a crueler view on that they be held or by death penalty by incarceration. No questions? Gee, I'm getting way lucky.
Yes, you are. Well, the clock is striking 1, I think, so we
Thank you very
Senator,
much.
very
I've
much.
enjoyed it. See you.